Mom, you don't need the lake house anymore. I mean, let's be realistic. At your age, it just makes sense to downsize. It'll all be mine eventually anyway. Might as well streamline things now.
My daughter's voice, smooth, rehearsed, dripping with false concern, still echoes in my mind. She sat across from me at my kitchen table 3 days after we buried my husband. 3 days. The funeral flowers hadn't even wilted yet, and there she was, hands folded like a lawyer closing a deal, telling me what I could and couldn't handle anymore. But here's what she didn't know, what none of them ever know. I was already 10 steps ahead. By the time she opened her mouth that day, the trap had already been set. My husband and I, we'd planned it years ago. Every clause, every buried obligation, every beautiful burden wrapped up in that lakeside property. We knew someone would come for it eventually. We just didn't know it would be our own daughter, moving so fast the grief hadn't even settled in her bones. Elder abuse is when children see parents as mere assets or inconveniences. If you've felt this betrayal, know you're not alone. Share your story, even if it's just where you live, just a few words in the comments. Admitting you're trapped is the first step toward freedom. I've been there, and they don't always win. Let me take you back to that morning. The house still smelled like casserole and lilies. My husband's reading glasses sat on the side table where he'd left them, like he might walk back in any moment and pick up his book. I was numb, hollow out, moving through the world like I was underwater. That's the state she found me in. That's the state she chose to exploit. She arrived exactly at 9, punctual, professional. She'd probably scheduled it in her calendar, secure lake house, Friday, 9 a.m. I poured her coffee. She didn't touch it. "Mom," she began, her voice syrupy with manufactured warmth, "I've been thinking about your situation." My situation, as if my husband's death was a logistical problem requiring her project management skills. "The lake house is too much for you now," she continued, each word carefully selected, tested. "Too big, too isolated, all those stairs, the maintenance, the winter weather, it's not safe." I said nothing. I've learned over 70 years that silence is the most powerful weapon a woman can wield. She leaned forward, mistaking my quiet for weakness. "I'm worried about you out there alone. What if something happens? What if you fall? There's no one around for miles." Fall. That word hung in the air between us like a threat wrapped in concern. I looked at her then, really looked at her. Her expensive haircut, her manicured nails drumming impatiently on my table, her eyes darting to her phone every few seconds. This wasn't grief I was seeing. This wasn't a daughter aching for her father. This was calculation. This was hunger. "I think it would be better," she pressed on, voice tightening ever so slightly, "if I took over the property. For your own good. We can do the transfer now, while everything's fresh. Get it settled." While everything's fresh. She meant while you're vulnerable, while you're weak, while you're too broken to fight back. "I mean, it'll be mine eventually anyway, right?" The mask slipped just a fraction, just enough. "This way we save on taxes, avoid probate, make it clean." There it was, the truth bleeding through her carefully constructed concern. She didn't want to inherit the lake house. She wanted to take it. She wanted to strip it from my hands while they were still shaking with grief. I took a sip of my coffee, let the silence stretch, watched her squirm. "What do you think, Mom?" Her voice sharpened, impatience cutting through the sweetness. "Should we call the lawyer? Get this handled?" I set down my cup slowly, met her eyes, and smiled. "Yes," I said simply, "let's do that." Her face flooded with relief so naked it was almost obscene. She actually thought she'd won. She thought her aging, grieving mother had just rolled over and surrendered the crown jewel of our estate without a single question. Poor baby. She had no idea what she was signing. What my daughter didn't understand, what she was too arrogant and too greedy to ever imagine, was that the lake house wasn't a gift. It was a curse my husband and I had wrapped in pretty paper decades ago, just waiting for someone foolish enough to grab it. She wanted control. She wanted to manage me, to manage what was left of my life. Fine, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. The contracts were sitting in my lawyer's office, pristine and precise. Every environmental restriction, every maintenance mandate, every impossible obligation tied to that beautiful, poisonous property. All documented, all legal, all waiting. She could have it. She could have every single inch of it. And in return, I'd finally be free. Little did she know this was just the beginning. The sweetness of her victory would curdle soon enough. And when it did, when she finally understood what she'd taken from me, that's when the real story would begin. The weeks after I signed those papers were instructive. That's the word I'll use. Instructive. Like watching a nature documentary where the predator finally catches its prey and you get to see what it does next. My daughter became bolder, louder. The mask didn't just slip, it cracked wide open. She started calling every other day, not to ask how I was doing, not to check if I was eating, sleeping, breathing. No, she called to manage me, to inform me of decisions she'd already made. One Tuesday afternoon, she phoned while I was folding laundry. My husband's shirts still hung in the closet. I couldn't bring myself to pack them yet. The phone rang sharp and insistent, the way she'd become. She didn't even say hello, just launched right in, her voice bright with authority. "Mom, I've been looking at the property taxes. We need to get you moved out by spring. The house in town is too big for you anyway." We need, not I think or would you consider. We need. I pressed the phone to my ear and said nothing, let her fill the silence. "I mean, let's be realistic," she continued, words tumbling out faster now, revealing something underneath. "You're alone now. You don't need 4 bedrooms. The yard is too much work. And honestly, Mom, at your age, it just makes sense to downsize." At your age. She said it so casually, like my age was a diagnosis, a diminishment, a reason to surrender control of everything I'd built. I folded one of my husband's flannel shirts. It still smelled faintly of him, of wood smoke and Old Spice. "Are you listening?" Her impatience crackled through the phone line like static. "I'm listening," I said quietly. "Good, because I'm just trying to help here." Her voice tightened, defensive now, irritated that I wasn't falling over myself with gratitude. Someone has to think practically. Someone has to make the hard decisions. Someone has to. As if I'd been sitting idle for 70 years, incapable of thought or action. That's when I heard it, the thing she didn't mean to say out loud. "It'll all be mine eventually anyway," she muttered, half to herself. "Might as well streamline things now." My hands stopped moving. The shirt hung limp in my grip. There it was. The raw, ugly truth she'd been dressing up in concern and practicality and filial duty. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an obstacle between her and my assets. I was a process to be streamlined, a problem to be efficiently solved. I should have felt hurt, betrayed, devastated. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Something cold and clear and diamond hard. Certainty. She kept talking, filling my silence with plans and timelines and logistics. I let her voice wash over me like static. I wasn't listening to her words anymore. I was listening to what lived underneath them. Control. That's what she wanted. Not the house, not the money. Control over me. She wanted to manage my life the way she managed her calendar, her finances, her carefully curated existence. She wanted to look at her friends and say, "I'm handling everything for Mom. It's so hard, but someone has to do it." She wanted the performance of caregiving without the actual care. My husband and I used to talk about this. Late at night, when we couldn't sleep, we'd lie in bed at the lake house and listen to the water lap against the dock. He'd take my hand in the darkness and say, "If something happens to me, she'll come for the house." He knew. We both knew. "The question is," he'd murmured, his voice rough with age and knowing, "do we let her take it, or do we make sure she understands what taking really means?" We'd spent years building that understanding, clause by clause, regulation by regulation, one careful trap after another, all perfectly legal, all perfectly documented. Not to hurt her, never to hurt her, but to teach her. The calls kept coming, each one sharper than the last. "Mom, I need your tax returns for the estate planning." "Mom, I'm scheduling a realtor to look at the house just to get an estimate." "Mom, we need to talk about power of attorney. It's just smart, just in case." Just in case I became inconvenient, just in case I objected, just in case I remembered I was still alive and still had rights and still had a voice. She wasn't asking permission anymore, she was informing me. Each conversation pushed further, tested boundaries, assumed more authority over my life. And I let her. I said yes when she wanted documents. I said yes when she wanted access to accounts. I said yes when she suggested I was too fragile, too old, too confused to manage my own affairs. Because here's what she didn't understand. Every yes was another link in her chain. The lake house sat waiting, beautiful and patient and deadly. All those environmental restrictions we'd agreed to 30 years ago when the county tightened regulations. All those homeowners association requirements that seemed reasonable at the time but had grown teeth over the decades. All those mandatory repairs and inspections and compliance orders that could never quite be satisfied. The house couldn't be sold without meeting every single requirement, and meeting them, that would cost more than the house was worth. My daughter thought she was inheriting an asset. She was inheriting a life sentence. One evening, about 6 weeks after the funeral, she came by unannounced, let herself in with the key she'd copied without asking. I was sitting in my husband's chair, the one that still held the shape of him, reading his favorite book. She walked in carrying paint samples and fabric swatches, spreading them across my coffee table like she owned the place, like she owned me. "I'm thinking of redecorating the lake house," she announced brightly, her voice artificially cheerful. "Make it more my style, more modern." She held up a swatch of cold gray fabric, nothing like the warm colors my husband and I had chosen together, room by room, year by year. "What do you think?" She didn't wait for an answer. "I'm hosting friends there next month. It'll be nice to finally use it properly." Finally use it properly, as if the 40 years my husband and I had spent there, raising her, building memories, growing old together, had been some kind of waste. I looked at her then, really looked at her, at the greed shining in her eyes, at the impatience twitching in her fingers, at the complete absence of grief or gratitude or anything resembling love. And I smiled. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said softly. She beamed, gathered up her samples, kissed my cheek with all the warmth of a business transaction. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Mom," she said as she headed for the door. "It makes everything so much easier." Easier. That's what she wanted. An easy inheritance, an easy transfer of power, easy control over the woman who'd given her life. The door closed behind her. I sat in the silence she left behind. Outside, winter was coming. The first frost had already touched the windows. Soon the lake would freeze. Soon the homeowners' taxes would come due. Soon the environmental compliance reports would arrive. Soon the homeowners' association would start their inspections. Soon my daughter would learn what ownership really costs. And I would finally be free. But first, she needed to believe she'd won. Completely, utterly, without question. That's when the real lessons would begin. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon furniture polish, the kind of smell that clings to places where important documents live and die. I sat in one of those stiff leather chairs that creaked every time you breathed. My daughter sat beside me, practically vibrating with excitement. She thought this was her victory day. Mr. Patterson had been our family attorney for 30 years. He knew my husband, he knew me, and more importantly, he knew exactly what we'd built into those contracts. He looked at me over his reading glasses, his eyes asking a silent question, "Are you sure?" I nodded once, firm, final. My daughter didn't notice the exchange. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, already planning what she'd do with her prize. Mr. Patterson slid the documents across his mahogany desk. Thick stacks of paper, crisp and official. Page after page of legalese that my daughter would never read. That was the genius of it. People don't read what they think they already understand. "These are the transfer documents," Mr. Patterson said in his careful, measured voice. "Professional, neutral. Everything is in order. The lake house will transfer to you upon signature." My daughter's hand shot out so fast she nearly knocked over the pen holder, eager, greedy, like a child grabbing candy before someone could take it away. "Where do I sign?" she asked, her voice bright and breathless. Mr. Patterson pointed to the signature lines, dozens of them. She signed each one, without hesitation, without reading, without asking a single question about terms or conditions or obligations. Arrogance makes people stupid. I watched her pen fly across the pages, watched her claim what she thought was hers, watched her seal her own fate with blue ink and absolute certainty. When it came time for my signature, I picked up the pen slowly, let it hover over the paper for just a moment, long enough that my daughter glanced at me, a flicker of anxiety crossing her face. Then I signed. Clean, clear, done. "Congratulations," Mr. Patterson said quietly, gathering the documents. He looked at my daughter with something that might have been pity. "The property is now legally yours." She actually squealed, a grown woman in her 50s, squealing like she'd won the lottery. "Thank you, Mom," she gushed, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Her grip was quick, perfunctory, already moving on to the next thing. "This is really the best decision, for both of us, you'll see." For both of us, she actually believed that. We walked out into the autumn sunshine. The air smelled like dying leaves and wood smoke. My daughter was already on her phone, texting someone, probably her friends, probably crowing about her acquisition. She drove me home without conversation, just the radio playing soft jazz and the sound of her thumbs tapping against her phone screen. When we pulled into my driveway, she barely waited for me to unbuckle my seatbelt. "I've got to run," she announced cheerfully. "So much to do now. I'll call you later." She didn't call. That night, I sat in my living room as darkness filled the windows. The house felt different somehow, lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying for decades had finally lifted from my shoulders. I thought about the lake house, about the summers my husband and I had spent there, thinking we were building something beautiful. We'd painted every room ourselves, replaced the dock 3 times, planted gardens that required constant care, fixed the roof twice, upgraded the septic system, dealt with the endless inspections and regulations and community requirements. It had been exhausting, year after year after year of maintenance and money and obligations that never ended. The property taxes alone had nearly crushed us some years, and as the environmental regulations tightened, as the Lake Association added more rules, as the county got stricter about everything, the house had stopped being a retreat and started being a prison. My husband had understood this before I did. He'd been the one to suggest we turn that prison into something useful, something instructive. I remembered the night he'd first proposed it. We'd been sitting on the dock, watching the sunset paint the water orange and gold. Beautiful. Deceptive. Like everything else about that place. "If she wants it so badly," he'd said quietly, his voice rough with cigarettes and age, "we should let her have it. All of it." He'd smiled then, not a cruel smile, just knowing, tired, wise. "But we make sure she takes everything that comes with it, every obligation, every restriction, every impossible requirement. We document it all, make it legal, make it binding." We'd spent 5 years working with Mr. Patterson, building the perfect transfer contract. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be challenged in court, just the absolute truth of what owning that property really meant. The house couldn't be sold without meeting every environmental regulation, and those regulations, they required assessments that cost tens of thousands, repairs that cost even more, compliance reports that needed professional preparation, all before a single buyer could even make an offer. The Homeowners Association had mandatory fees, mandatory participation, mandatory improvements whenever they decided the neighborhood needed upgrading, and they decided that often. The property taxes had tripled in the last decade, the insurance had become astronomical, the maintenance never stopped. That house ate money like a fire eats oxygen. And now? Now it belonged entirely to my daughter. She'd been so certain she was taking something valuable, so convinced she was securing her financial future, so arrogant in her belief that she was smarter than her aging parents. What she'd actually done was handcuff herself to a sinking ship. And the beautiful part? She'd done it to herself. I hadn't forced her, hadn't tricked her, hadn't lied. The documents spelled out everything, every clause, every obligation, every requirement. She just hadn't bothered to read them. I made myself tea that night, Earl Grey, the way my husband used to make it, strong and hot and comforting. I sat in his chair and sipped slowly, feeling something I hadn't felt since the day he died. Peace. My daughter had the house, she had the deed, she had the title, she had everything she'd wanted. And I had my freedom back. The phone rang a few days later. My daughter's voice came through bright and energetic, already planning renovations and parties and all the ways she'd enjoy her new property. "I'm thinking of replacing the dock," she chirped happily. "The old one is so dated, and maybe adding a second bathroom. Really make the place mine." I listened to her dream out loud, listened to her plan expenditures she couldn't afford for a property that would never let her go. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said softly. She hung up satisfied, victorious, blind. I sat in the quiet she left behind and finished my tea. The first property tax bill would arrive in November. The environmental assessment deadline was December. The Homeowners Association's mandatory winter inspection was January. The trap was closing, slowly, perfectly, inevitably. And my daughter? She was too busy celebrating to notice the walls moving in. By the time she understood what she'd taken, it would be far too late to give it back. For 3 glorious months, my daughter lived in a dream. She moved into the lake house the week after Thanksgiving, didn't ask if I wanted to come see it one last time, didn't offer to help me sort through 40 years of memories stored in the attic, just showed up with a moving truck and her plans, already erasing us from the place we'd built. I heard about it all secondhand, through her social media posts, through mutual friends who thought they were being kind by keeping me updated, through the photos she never sent directly to me but shared with the entire world. Look at my beautiful lake house. That's what every post said in one way or another. My place, my view, my dock, my life. The word my appeared so often it became a kind of prayer, a mantra, a claim staked over and over, as if repetition could make ownership feel more real. She threw a housewarming party in early December. I heard it was quite the event. Catered food, expensive wine, string lights hung across the deck my husband had rebuilt with his own hands. Her friends posed for pictures by the water, holding champagne glasses, laughing at jokes I'd never hear. One of her friends posted a photo that someone showed me. My daughter standing on the dock, arms spread wide like she was embracing the whole lake. The caption read, "Finally living my best life." I stared at that photo for a long time, at her face glowing with triumph, at her posture screaming victory, at everything she thought she'd won. Poor thing, she had no idea the timer had already started. The calls during those months were insufferable. She'd phone me maybe once a week, always breathless, always bragging. I'd hold the phone away from my ear and let her voice wash over me like background noise. She told me about the furniture she'd bought, about how she'd donated all our old things to charity without asking, about the renovations she was planning, about the parties she was hosting, about how everyone was so impressed with her place. "You should see it, Mom," she'd say in that false, bright voice, the one that pretended she cared what I thought. "It's completely transformed, so much better than before, more modern, more me." More me. Like the house had been waiting all these years to finally reflect her personality. She never asked how I was doing, never asked if I needed anything, never asked if I was lonely in my too big house with my dead husband's clothes still hanging in the closet. She was too busy being delighted with herself to notice I existed as anything other than an audience for her success. I said very little during those calls, just made appropriate sounds at appropriate moments, let her interpret my silence however she needed to. She interpreted it as defeat, as resignation, as an old woman gracefully accepting her diminished role in the world. She was wrong on all counts. Christmas came, she didn't invite me to the lake house. She spent it there with her friends instead, posting photos of her designer decorations and her artfully arranged presents under a tree that stood exactly where our old tree used to stand. New Year's passed, she threw another party. More champagne, more photos, more proclamations of her perfect new life. I spent both holidays alone. Quiet, content, waiting. In late January, she called with a new kind of excitement in her voice. Sharper, more manic. The excitement of someone who's convinced they've had a brilliant idea. "Mom, I'm thinking of renting out the lake house," she announced proudly, as if she'd invented real estate. "Short-term rentals, Airbnb. The income potential is amazing." She rattled off numbers, projected earnings, occupancy rates, return on investment, all the calculations of someone who'd watched too many get-rich-quick videos online. "I could make thousands a month," she said breathlessly. "Maybe even quit my job eventually. This place could be my retirement plan." Retirement plan. The lake house that had drained my husband's retirement funds year after year, that had forced us to delay vacations and skip luxuries and live more carefully than we'd wanted. That house was going to fund her early retirement. "That sounds ambitious," I said quietly. She took it as encouragement. "I've already started the application process. Just need to get a few permits, update some safety features. Nothing major." Nothing major. Those two words hung in the air between us like a prophecy. "Well, good luck with that," I told her. She heard support. I meant something else entirely. February brought more photos, more updates, more celebrations of her acquisition. She'd started calling it the estate now, as if our modest 3-bedroom lake house had somehow transformed into a mansion through the sheer force of her ownership. Her friends visited constantly. I heard about it from my neighbor's daughter who worked at the local grocery store. Apparently, my daughter came in weekly, buying expensive cuts of meat and imported cheeses, entertaining like she was running a resort. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd claimed the house was too much for me to handle, too big, too complicated, too expensive, and now she was treating it like a vacation rental. But here's what she didn't know. Here's what all those guests and parties and renovations were costing her. Here's what her ambitious rental plans were about to collide with. The property taxes were due in March. The environmental compliance report was required before any commercial rental permit could be issued. The Homeowners Association had strict rules about short-term rentals, rules that required substantial insurance and liability coverage, rules that came with fees, many, many fees. And the house itself? It was old. 40 years of settling and shifting and slow decay hidden behind fresh paint and new curtains. The foundation had cracks. The roof needed replacing. The plumbing was original. The electrical system hadn't been updated since the 80s. That house was a money pit wrapped in pretty wallpaper. My husband and I had known this, had lived it, had been drowning in it slowly for years. We'd kept it going through sheer stubbornness and careful budgeting and constant, exhausting maintenance. My daughter thought she could turn it into passive income. The delusion was almost beautiful. I marked my calendar. March 15th. That's when the first property tax bill would arrive. $8,000, due in 30 days. March 20th. That's when the Environmental Assessment Agency would contact her about the required shoreline inspection. Cost? $12,000, mandatory before any rental permits. April 1st. That's when the Homeowners Association would send their annual fee notice. $6,000, plus special assessments for neighborhood improvements, another $4,000. $30,000 in 6 weeks. And that was just the beginning. I sat in my quiet house and waited, patient, calm, certain. The last photo she posted before everything changed showed her on the deck at sunset, golden hour light, wine glass in hand, smile wide and victorious. The caption read, "Dreams really do come true." I looked at that photo and felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not cruelty, not vindictiveness. Justice. The bills were already in the mail, and my daughter's beautiful dream was about to become a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The first call came on a Tuesday in mid-March. I was watering my African violets when the phone rang, the plants my husband had given me for our 40th anniversary. They were blooming purple and delicate, thriving in their small pots. Simple things, manageable things, mine. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. My daughter's voice came through tight and strained, like a wire pulled too taut. "Mom, did you know about the property taxes?" No greeting, no small talk, just accusation wrapped in confusion. "I paid them every year," I replied calmly, setting down my watering can. "But they're $8,000. Her voice climbed higher, sharper, panic bleeding through. $8,000? That's due in 3 weeks. I said nothing. let the silence do its work. "How did you afford this?" she demanded, frustration crackling through the phone line. "How is this even possible?" "We budgeted carefully," I told her simply. "Your father and I." She made a sound between a gasp and a growl. "Well, I don't have $8,000 just lying around. I've already spent so much on furniture and renovations and—" Her voice trailed off, the mathematics finally reaching her brain. All that money she'd spent celebrating her victory, that was supposed to cover this. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said, gently, kindly even. She hung up without saying goodbye. That was just the beginning. 2 days later, another call. This time her voice shook with something worse than anger. Fear. "There's a letter from the Environmental Agency," she said, words tumbling out fast and breathless. "They want a shoreline assessment. They say it's mandatory. Mom, it costs $12,000. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. Outside, March wind rattled the windows. Cold, unforgiving. "Yes, those come every 5 years, I explained patiently. "It's in the contract. The Environmental Protection Clause. Section 12, I believe." "Section 12? She sounded lost, drowning. "I don't remember seeing that." Of course she didn't. She hadn't read past the signature lines, hadn't bothered to understand what she was claiming, had been too greedy, too eager, too certain of her own cleverness. "The lake is protected habitat," I continued in my quiet, steady voice. "The county requires regular assessments to ensure we're not damaging the ecosystem. You have to comply before you can get any rental permits." Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, rapid, shallow, the breathing of someone realizing they're trapped. "This can't be right. This can't all be—" "It's all in the documents," I told her truthfully. "Mr. Patterson has copies if you need them." She hung up again, faster this time. The calls kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. The Homeowners Association sent their annual notice, $6,000 in regular fees, $4,000 in special assessments for neighborhood improvements, mandatory, non-negotiable, with penalties for late payment. The insurance company informed her that her current policy didn't cover short-term rentals. She'd need commercial coverage, triple the cost, plus liability insurance, plus additional riders for lake access and dock usage. The numbers kept climbing, piling up, suffocating. And then came the letter that broke her. I heard about it through the panic in her voice when she called at 7 a.m, waking me from peaceful sleep. She was crying, actually crying, tears and snot and gasping breaths. "Mom, they're saying I can't sell," she choked out between sobs. "The house, I can't sell it, not without completing all the compliance requirements first, every single one. Mom, that's over $40,000 in inspections and repairs before I can even list it." I sat up slowly, pulled my robe around me. The morning light was gray and soft through my bedroom curtains. "That's correct," I confirmed gently. "But why?" Her voice cracked, broken. "Why would anyone agree to those terms? Why would you and Dad?" "We didn't agree," I interrupted softly. "The county imposed them, gradually, over 30 years, each new regulation adding to the last. We didn't have a choice. But she did. She could have asked, could have read, could have investigated what she was taking before she grabbed it with both hands. "What am I supposed to do?" she wailed into the phone, lost, desperate, realizing too late that victory had teeth. "What your father and I did," I told her. "You manage it, you maintain it, you pay for it. That's what ownership means." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. weighted with understanding she didn't want to accept. "I can't afford this," she whispered finally, raw, honest, terrified. "Then you shouldn't have taken it," I replied simply. She hung up without another word. That night, I made myself chamomile tea and sat by the window, watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The house around me was small, quiet, easy to heat, easy to maintain, easy to afford. I downsized after the funeral, moved into this little 2-bedroom rental in town. My daughter had been so pleased when I told her, thought it meant I was finally accepting my reduced circumstances, finally acknowledging my limitations. She'd been half right. I was accepting something, but not limitation. Liberation. The lake house had been a beautiful prison for 40 years. My husband and I had poured our lives into it, our money, our energy, our dreams. And slowly, year by year, it had consumed everything we had. The property taxes that climbed every year, the maintenance that never ended, the regulations that kept tightening, the obligations that multiplied like weeds. We'd talked about selling it so many times, but by the time we understood what we'd gotten into, we were already trapped. The compliance requirements had grown so extensive, so expensive, that selling would have cost more than we had. So we decided to wait. Wait for someone who wanted it badly enough to take it without asking questions. Someone arrogant enough to assume they were smarter than us. Someone greedy enough to sign without reading. My husband had been the architect, the planner, the one who'd sat down with Mr. Patterson and structured everything perfectly, legally, irrevocably. "If she wants control so badly," he'd said quietly one night, his voice rough with illness and knowing, "let's give her something to control." And we had. Every obligation, every restriction, every impossible burden, all transferred cleanly, legally, permanently. My daughter had wanted the lake house. She'd wanted to manage my life. She'd wanted to prove she was smarter, more capable, more deserving. Well, now she could prove it. I sipped my tea and watched the stars. Tomorrow she'd call again, and the day after, and the day after that. Each call more frantic than the last, because the bills wouldn't stop coming, the requirements wouldn't stop accumulating, the house wouldn't stop demanding more and more and more. That lake house would devour her savings, her retirement, her peace of mind, her sleep, her freedom, exactly the way it had devoured mine. The difference was, I'd loved that house once. I'd chosen it with my husband, built memories there, made it mean something. My daughter? She just wanted to own it, to control it, to profit from it. And now she'd discover what I'd learned over 40 years. Some things own you back. April arrived with rain. Cold, relentless spring rain that hammered against windows and turned the world gray. I sat in my small living room listening to it drum against the roof, a sound I used to dread at the lake house. Every storm meant checking for leaks, inspecting the foundation, worrying about the dock. Here, in my rental, the rain was just rain. Someone else's problem, someone else's worry, someone else's burden. My daughter stopped posting photos on social media. The cheerful updates disappeared. The celebrations ended. Her online presence went dark and silent, like a light switching off. I knew why. The bills had finally caught up with her fantasy. Reality had teeth, and it was biting down hard. She'd taken out a second mortgage on her house in town. I heard about it from her neighbor who attended my church. The woman had mentioned it casually after Sunday service, concern written across her face. "Your daughter seems stressed lately," she'd said, touching my arm gently. "Is everything all right?" I'd smiled, said something vague about adjustments and transitions, let her interpret it however she needed. But I knew the truth. My daughter was drowning. Financially, emotionally, completely. The lake house was eating her alive. She'd borrowed money from friends, maxed out credit cards, cut every expense she could think of, and still it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. That house demanded more than money. It demanded time, attention, constant vigilance. It demanded you sacrifice everything else to keep it standing. My husband and I had learned this slowly, painfully, over decades. My daughter was learning it in months, and the speed of that education was destroying her. The calls had changed in tone. No more anger, no more accusations, just desperation soaked in exhaustion. "Mom, the dock needs replacing," she'd told me last week, her voice flat and dead. "The inspector says it's a safety hazard, $8,000 minimum, and it has to be done before summer or the homeowners association will fine me." I'd made a sympathetic sound, said nothing else. "And the roof is leaking," she'd continued, words mechanical now, recited like a list she'd memorized. "The plumber says the pipes are corroding. The electrician says the whole system needs updating. Mom, I don't know what to do." "I don't know what to do," the refrain of someone who'd grabbed something too big to hold. "It's a lot," I'd agreed softly. "A lot?" Her voice cracked then, nearly broke. "Mom, I'm ruined. I'm completely ruined. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every day there's another bill, another requirement, another impossible demand." I listened to her cry, listened to her break down completely, listened to the sound of consequences catching up with greed. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just a deep, bone-tired certainty that this was exactly what needed to happen. My daughter had viewed my life as something to manage, my grief as something to exploit, my vulnerability as an opportunity for advancement. She'd looked at her aging mother and seen not a person, but an obstacle between her and assets. She'd treated me like I was already gone, like my existence was just paperwork waiting to be processed. Well, now she understood what we'd carried all those years. The weight my husband and I had borne together, the financial pressure that never eased, the obligations that multiplied faster than we could meet them, the slow realization that we'd bought not a dream home, but a beautiful trap. We'd poured our retirement into that house, delayed travel, skipped luxuries, worked longer than we wanted to, all to keep feeding a property that gave nothing back but stress and debt and endless, exhausting maintenance. I'd watched my husband age under that weight, seen him grow tired and gray and worn, watched him spend his final years worrying about taxes and repairs instead of enjoying what time he had left. The lake house had stolen our golden years, quietly, politely, completely. And when my daughter swooped in, impatient and greedy, demanding to take it off my hands, I let her. Not out of cruelty, not even out of revenge, really, out of completion. She wanted what we had. She wanted to own it, control it, profit from it. She'd been so certain she could do it better, smarter, more efficiently than her foolish old parents. So I gave her the chance, gave her exactly what she asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. Every obligation, every burden, every crushing responsibility. That was the inheritance. Not wealth, not assets, not security, just the full weight of ownership transferred completely. Let her carry it now. Let her understand what it meant to be trapped by something beautiful. My husband had known this would happen, had planned for it. The night before he died, when the cancer had stolen most of his words, he'd squeezed my hand and whispered something I'd never forget. "Let her take it," he'd breathed, his voice barely audible. "Let her learn." He'd closed his eyes then, smiled slightly, at peace with what we'd built together. Not just a life, but a final lesson for the daughter who'd never learned to value either of us. The rain kept falling. I finished my tea and picked up my book, a mystery novel from the library. Simple, entertaining, free. My life was small now, contained, but it was mine. No property taxes looming, no environmental inspections pending, no homeowners association breathing down my neck, no maintenance emergencies at 3 a.m, no stress, no burden, no trap. Just a quiet apartment, a fixed rent, and freedom I hadn't felt in 40 years. My daughter still had the lake house, still owned it completely, still couldn't sell it without spending money she didn't have, still couldn't abandon it without legal consequences. She'd wanted ownership. Well, now she had it. And every day, every bill, every demand, every sleepless night, she was learning what I already knew. Some inheritances are curses dressed as gifts. The phone rang again. I looked at the screen, her name glowing in the darkness. I let it ring once more. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. "Hello, dear," I said gently. Her voice came through ragged and broken and desperate beyond words. This was the moment everything would change. The moment she'd finally understand there was no escape, no exit, no way out. And the moment I'd speak the truth she'd been running from since the day she signed those papers. She arrived at my door on a Sunday morning in late April. I heard her car pull up, heard the engine cut off, then nothing, just silence. She sat out there for 10 minutes before finally getting out. I watched through the window, saw her walk up my pathway like she was climbing toward execution, her shoulders hunched, her movements slow, defeated. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. She'd aged a decade in 6 months. Her skin was gray, dark circles carved beneath her eyes like bruises. Her clothes hung loose, like she'd forgotten to eat or couldn't afford to. Her hands shook when she lifted them to push hair from her face. "Mom," she whispered. Just that. Just my name, broken and small. I stepped aside, let her in. She walked to my couch and collapsed onto it like her bones had given up holding her upright. I made tea, Earl Grey, the way she used to like it when she was young, before she'd grown ambitious and hard and certain of her own cleverness. I brought it to her in my good china, the cups my mother had given me, delicate, precious, fragile. She wrapped both hands around the cup, didn't drink, just held it like the warmth was the only thing keeping her together. I sat in my armchair, waited, let the silence build until she couldn't bear it anymore. "I'm drowning," she finally said, her voice barely audible, hollow, empty of everything except exhaustion. "Mom, I'm completely drowning." I sipped my tea, said nothing. "I've taken out loans I can't repay. I've borrowed from everyone I know. I've sold things, cut expenses to nothing, and it's still not enough. That house just keeps demanding more money, more time, more everything." She looked up at me then. Her eyes were red, raw, swimming with tears she was too tired to cry. "Why didn't you warn me?" she asked, her voice climbing higher, anger flickering beneath the desperation. "Why didn't you tell me what I was getting into?" I set down my teacup, carefully. precisely. Let the small ceramic sound fill the space between us. Would you have listened? I asked quietly. She opened her mouth, closed it. The fight drained out of her as quickly as it had appeared. You wanted that house, I continued, my voice steady and calm. You insisted. You pushed. You made it clear that I was too old, too incompetent, too foolish to manage my own life. You took what you wanted. But I thought, she started. You thought you were taking an asset, I interrupted gently. You thought you were being smart, practical, getting ahead of inheritance taxes and probate, taking control of what would be yours eventually. She nodded miserably, confirming everything. What you actually took, I said slowly, deliberately, was 40 years of obligation, 40 years of weight your father and I carried every single day, 40 years of sacrifice and stress and burden we shouldered together. My daughter stared at me, understanding dawning slowly, horribly. You knew what you were giving me. I knew what you were taking, I corrected. There's a difference. She stood abruptly. The tea sloshed in her cup, nearly spilled. She set it down with shaking hands. This is cruel, she said, voice trembling between anger and tears. Mom, this is cruel. I'm your daughter. How could you do this to me? I looked at her for a long moment, at this woman I'd raised, fed, loved, watched grow from a sweet child into someone I barely recognized, someone who'd looked at my grief and seen opportunity, who'd looked at my vulnerability and seen weakness to exploit. You wanted it anyway, I said softly. 4 words. That's all it took. You wanted it anyway. She stood there frozen, those words sinking in like stones, heavy, irrevocable, true. I didn't force you to take that house, I continued, my voice quiet but unshakable. I didn't trick you. I didn't lie. Every single obligation was documented. Every requirement was in the contract. Every burden was spelled out clearly in the transfer papers. I stood then, walked to my bookshelf, pulled out the folder I'd kept, the copy of every document she'd signed. I handed it to her. Section 12, I said, pointing to the environmental clause. Section 18, Section 23, Section 31. It's all there. Every word you didn't bother to read because you were too excited about getting what you wanted. She took the folder with numb fingers, stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. You could have asked questions, I told her. You could have had a lawyer review the documents. You could have slowed down, thought it through, considered what you were taking on. I sat back down, picked up my tea. But you didn't, I continued, because you were certain you knew better than your foolish old parents, certain you could manage what we couldn't, certain that taking control was the smart, practical, responsible thing to do. My daughter's face crumpled. She sank back onto the couch. The folder slipped from her hands onto the cushion beside her. What am I supposed to do now? She whispered brokenly. Mom, what am I supposed to do? I can't afford this. I can't maintain it. I can't sell it. I'm trapped. Yes, she was. Exactly the way I'd been trapped for 40 years. Exactly the way my husband had been trapped until the day he died. Trapped by something beautiful that slowly consumed everything we had. You do what your father and I did, I said simply. You manage it. You maintain it. You pay for it. That's what ownership means. But I can't, she cried, tears finally spilling over, running down her gaunt cheeks. Mom, I can't. It's impossible. I looked at her evenly, without sympathy, without cruelty, just truth. Then you shouldn't have taken it, I said. The silence that followed was absolute, total, like the moment after a door slams shut and you realize there's no handle on your side. She sat there crying, broken, lost, understanding finally arriving, too late to matter. I'd given her exactly what she asked for, nothing more, nothing less. She'd wanted the lake house. She'd wanted control. She'd wanted ownership. Well, now she owned it, completely, irrevocably, forever. And every obligation, every burden, every crushing weight that came with it. That was the inheritance, not property, not wealth, responsibility. The full, crushing, inescapable responsibility of owning something that owned you back. My daughter left an hour later, still crying, still broken, still trapped. I watched her drive away, watched her car disappear around the corner, watched the last of her certainty vanish into the gray April morning. Then I closed my door, locked it, went back to my tea. It had gone cold. I didn't mind. I poured it out, made a fresh cup, sat by the window and watched the rain begin again. Soft, gentle, someone else's problem now. My daughter would return to that lake house tonight. She'd walk through its beautiful rooms and feel nothing but weight. And every day after, for years to come, she'd understand what I'd known all along. Freedom isn't having everything you want. It's wanting only what you can carry.
That was 2 years ago. I'm sitting in my small apartment now, telling you this story. Sunlight streams through clean windows. My African violets bloom purple on the sill. The rent is paid. The utilities are manageable. Everything here is mine, and mine alone. Simple, quiet, free. My daughter still owns the lake house. She can't sell it. The compliance requirements have only grown more expensive, more complex, more impossible. She's trapped there, exactly as my husband and I planned, exactly as she deserves. Not because I'm cruel, not because I wanted revenge, because she needed to learn what taking really costs. She calls me sometimes, not often anymore. The conversations are brief, strained. She asks about my health with practiced politeness. I ask about hers with genuine concern. We dance around the elephant neither of us names. The lake house, that beautiful prison, that lesson she's still learning. I heard through a mutual friend that she tried to declare bankruptcy last year, thought it might release her from the obligations. But property ownership doesn't work that way. Not when environmental protections are involved, not when community covenants are attached, not when the county has claims. You can't bankruptcy your way out of responsibility. She's working 2 jobs now, barely sleeping, aging fast under the weight of something she thought would make her rich. Her friends stopped visiting, the parties ended, the social media posts died completely. The house owns her now, utterly, completely, the way it once owned me. But here's the difference. I loved that house once, chose it with my husband, built memories there that mattered, carried its weight willingly for decades because it was ours, our dream, our mistake, our burden to bear together. My daughter? She just wanted to own it, control it, profit from it, strip it from my grieving hands and claim victory. Well, she got her victory. And I got something better, something I haven't had in 40 years. Peace.
I sleep through the night now, deep, dreamless, no anxiety jolting me awake at 3 a.m. worrying about property taxes or roof leaks or dock repairs. No dread pooling in my stomach when the mail arrives. No crushing weight of obligations I can't meet. Just sleep. Sweet. Restorative. Free. I spend my days however I want. Reading library books, tending my plants, taking walks in the park,
having coffee with friends. Small pleasures that feel enormous when you've been denied them for decades. My bank account is modest but stable. No emergencies drain it, no unexpected bills destroy it, no desperate borrowing to cover another impossible requirement. I have enough. And enough is everything. Sometimes I think about my husband, about the nights we lay awake at the lake house, listening to water and worry, about the plans we made in whispers, about his final words, "Let her learn." He was right. She needed to learn, needed to understand that taking without thinking has consequences, that ownership without understanding becomes punishment, that greed dressed as practicality still destroys you in the end. We gave her that education, carefully, legally, completely. Not to hurt her, but to teach her what she'd refuse to learn any other way. That parents aren't obstacles to be managed, that aging doesn't equate incompetence, that vulnerability doesn't mean weakness, that sometimes silence is strategy, not surrender. And most importantly, that some things own you back. I don't regret what I did, not for a single moment. Some people might call it cruel, manipulative, wrong, but those people weren't there when my daughter sat across from me 3 days after burying my husband and spoke about the lake house like I was already dead. They didn't hear the calculation in her voice, the impatience, the absolute absence of grief or love or anything resembling human concern. They didn't watch her grab control of my life while I was still grieving, didn't watch her treat me like a problem to solve rather than a person to comfort. She made her choice. I simply ensured she understood it fully.
There's a photo I keep in my drawer, one of the last pictures taken at the lake house. My husband and I standing on the dock at sunset, his arm around my waist, both of us tired, worn, but together. We carried that burden together for 40 years, loved each other through it, survived it as a team. My daughter wanted to carry it alone, wanted to prove she was stronger, smarter, more capable than us. Well, now she knows the truth. I sleep deeply these days, wake up peaceful, spend my days free from worry. My life is small and simple and entirely, beautifully mine. The lake house belongs to my daughter. The costs belong to her too. The obligations, the stress, the weight, the trap. Everything she wanted, everything she took, everything she deserves. And me? After my husband's death, after 40 years of servitude to that beautiful prison, after decades of sacrifice and worry and crushing obligation, I own my life again. That's the real inheritance I received, not from my husband's death, but from my daughter's greed. She freed me by taking everything, and in taking everything, she imprisoned herself. Perfect justice wrapped in legal documents and signed with her own eager hand. So if you're sitting there listening to this, feeling trapped by someone who sees you as something to manage rather than someone to love, if your children look at you and see assets instead of a person, if you're being told you're too old, too weak, too incompetent to control your own life, remember this story. Remember that silence can be power, that patience can be strategy, that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people have exactly what they asked for. My daughter wanted the lake house. She got it. And I got freedom.
We both got exactly what we deserved. The afternoon sun warms my face. My tea is the perfect temperature. My violets are blooming. Tomorrow, I'm having lunch with a friend. Next week, I'm starting a watercolor class. Next month, I'm taking a bus trip to the coast. Small adventures, simple pleasures. A life that belongs entirely to me. My daughter is at the lake house right now, probably staring at another bill, another requirement, another impossible demand. She'll call eventually, maybe next week, maybe next month. And when she does, I'll answer kindly, ask how she's doing, listen to her struggles with appropriate concern. Because I'm not cruel, I'm just free. And that freedom, that peace, that small, simple, beautiful life I'm living now, that's worth every moment of silence, every calculated patience, every perfectly legal trap. My husband was right all along. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones we teach by simply letting go.